Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 51 Stories of Emotional Wellbeing with Emotional Ability Resources. Today, I have with me Priyanka Jain, a bright young lady who is a computer engineer for the last 2 decades. She left home after class 10 to study in a boarding school, and then she moved to the United States to pursue her master's in computer engineering. She's a mom to two small boys who are quite a handful, but yet at the same time, she balances it all with aplomb. So welcome to my show, Priyanka.
Thank you, Pragati. It's so nice to be here. Super nice to be chatting with you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, about Priyanka growing up. What were some of the challenges that you have overcome and that you faced?
Okay. Yeah, that's going to be a long answer. So, growing up, let's see. I mean, like you said, went to boarding school at 10 years old. Actually, I turned 10 in boarding school, which is what I always tell my kids, like, you should be so independent by now. And then after boarding school, I went to Bangalore to pursue my engineering degree. Then I came to the US, didn't know anybody here when I came, which was, I mean, now it seems difficult. Back then, we just took these things in our stride, right? We were young and able to handle anything and everything. And then, I mean, do you want me to go like full journey or
Absolutely.
just kind of?
Just feel comfortable sharing as you feel comfortable.
Yeah, cool. So after I did my bachelor's in Bangalore, I did my master's in computer science in Louisiana State in the US. And anybody who knows the US culture would understand Louisiana is very different from normal US. Like it's deep South, not very accepting of immigrants and stuff. So it was a little bit harder than could have been in other places. But, again, I was lucky. I met some really nice people. After that, I went for a summer internship to Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, still sort of a, mixed culture, Southern state more than not. But this was really, really bad because I knew nobody. At least like the university had a support system for the students, right? And here I went for a summer internship. I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have, there were no smartphones back then. You couldn't just like Google stuff. So it was super hard. I had to travel 4 hours a day by bus just to go like back and forth from work. At times I didn't even have like any means of doing groceries. And honestly, it was like a huge struggle. And then just as I was graduating, 9/11 happened and there were like no jobs to be had for immigrants. And I was just in between like my student and work visa. And it was such a difficult time. My sister got married just between I graduated and I could go to work. So I had no visa status. I couldn't go out of the country. So I had to like miss her wedding, which was really devastating at that age because like your family's everything, right? In your 20s still. And then I became financially independent pretty much when I landed in the US. So at this time, like I was not depending on my parents anymore. I started accumulating debt on my credit cards after 9/11. So I went through a real like period of hardship. I know we all went through that like isolation now, but literally for like 6 to 8 weeks while waiting for my visa, I was alone in my apartment. I had no money, so I didn't want to drive anywhere. And it was like a horrible struggle. Then, I mean, but again, like I said, back then we were young and we could just take it all in our stride. And then anyway, so then I started working, and then in the 20s we all have relationship struggles, so I had that too. My family didn't support my relationship. I had a devastating breakup, but then had to get married anyway because we all have that ticking biological clock. So, and it was a pretty hard adjustment because it turned out my husband and I were pretty different from each other. On paper it all looked good and we really liked each other when we met too, but living together was kind of really hard. So we went through those struggles. But then a few years later we had kids, and which was great in a way, but also like skyrocketed the amount of responsibility I had. And honestly, I had been through like a lot of emotional struggle by then already. And I think one thing I didn't mention is like when I came to the US, I also like learned that my parents had financial loans and stuff. So I wanted to not only become independent, but help them pay off their loans, which I did like over the next 5 years. I took care of all of that. I helped all my siblings and my parents migrate to the US during that time too. So I kind of took on way too much in my 20s without realizing it. Like most people in their 20s are carefree, they're making money suddenly and they're traveling, using that newfound income and independence in a very healthy and carefree way. But I kind of did the opposite. I took on, like, I was super carefree until my 20s. You remember me probably back in school. And then something just like a switch went off or something, and I became like super responsible. I would spend very little money on myself so I could like send it back home. I was working very hard. And then I was doing all these side things to help people, like not only my family, I helped a few other friends as well. So yeah, that was 20s. And then I fast forwarding back to having kids. By this time I was pretty careworn, right? Like I had gone through a lot of financial stress, work related stress, because 9/11 and all that independence and everything. And then the relationship stress, right? Like breakup and then a difficult marriage and all that. Then when the kids happened, the older one, he's on the autism spectrum, but back then we didn't know, so it was easy enough. But my second son had asthma, like as an infant even, so it was a pretty difficult 3 years. He grew out of it after 3 years, but I can tell you, Prakriti, for 3 years I barely slept because all night he would cough, and he would, like, the only way he was comfortable was like upright on me, and I had to sleep upright all night with him being super restless. And through all of this, like starting in 2001, I never stopped working, right? Because also I think I had this fear from that financial hardship that I went through, that I just couldn't let go of my work. Part of it was identity, and part of it was just being able to be financially independent at all times, right? So I so wanted to quit my job when I had especially my second child, and he had his asthma, but at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I was a zombie for for 3, 4, maybe even longer. I was a total and utter zombie. But yeah, I think since then things have gotten better. And I think another stressor that I should mention, since we're talking about emotional strength and stuff, I think around 3, when my second son was 3 years, we realized our marriage just wasn't like going, or I realized it wasn't going where it should have been going, and went through a really difficult period with that too. We separated for like a year and a half, and that came with its own struggles, both from the marriage itself as well as from the logistics, right? Because building like creating a new home for yourself with 2 kids in tow while working and going through that emotional stress, it's no easy job. Like I gained so much more respect for like single parents and stuff. It's just not easy. But I feel like I haven't mentioned my health, which is really the key thing that triggered me to take care of my emotional health. At this point, like in 2013, 2014, I would say, like when my son was 2 years old, the second son, the older one was about 4 or 5, I was falling sick so often. So all of this time, right, starting in 2001, when I started taking on these responsibilities and started neglecting myself, which I didn't realize, like I can look back and in hindsight say that, but I was taking care of everybody else but myself. And slowly, like that emotional stress was chipping away at me, and I was falling sicker and sicker and sicker, right? So I got hypothyroidism when I was 23, pretty much. And then I went through other issues, like I had really bad PMS. Um, I can't remember now. Oh yeah, debilitating migraines and acid reflux and whatnot. But that really really high period of stress, where like I had marriage stress, I had kids health stress, I had, work stress, all of that stuff. And then I had also helped my parents move here, so I was taking care of most of their well-being as well, right? Everything that's related to them moving here, living here, their health and all that stuff, right? So like all the responsibility that comes with these things. So I was so exhausted and emotionally neglecting myself too. And then my body started like screaming at me. It was like, you need to stop, lady. In 1 year, I used to, those 1 or 2 years, I used to fall sick very badly every month or so. 1 year, I had like an ankle surgery. I lost my voice for 6 weeks. I was not allowed to talk for 6 weeks at all because of some vocal cord issues. And of course, the ankle surgery itself is intense. Like you go through the boot, the crutches, all of that stuff. Then I had strep, which is like a serious bacterial infection. And then finally, I had pneumonia. This is all in the span of 1 year, including like many different smaller issues, right? These are just the like highlights. And then by the time I had pneumonia, I had like no physical strength left in me. So I go to the gym pretty regularly since like the last 20 years or so. And I could just feel the difference. If I used to lift like 20-pound dumbbells or whatever, I could not lift 2 pounds, right? I really hit rock bottom, physically and mentally. And I had to like start from ground zero. But we were talking about my journey. And I think the point is, after all those masters and working and everything, currently I think things are good. Like I built everything from ground up again. Um, and I still work. I head up an engineering division at a small startup. Last 2 years, or this is last 1 year, and before that I started my own company for 2 years. And then, as you know, I've worked at so many big companies. I was at Google, Yahoo, eBay, IBM. And I think career wise, this is a pretty decent time for me. I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing. Family wise, things are in shape. Health wise, they're much, much better. Can't say it's rosy because it doesn't switch like that. But, the last year has been very, very difficult. We had deaths in the family, as many people did because of the pandemic. So we had some big losses. We moved houses. I changed my job. My kid changed his school. My parents went to the hospital 5 times with like long stays, and they live with me. So like that's a huge deal. Um, but I think I got through it because I've taken that time to deal with all these struggles and build that emotional strength that you're talking about. So I kind of like, I've told you everything, I think, like in
No, no,
in
that's
10
nice,
minutes, but yeah.
Priyanka, because what I like is you're being
Mhm.
upfront about what has happened. Most people want
Mhm.
to perhaps present a rosier picture, or that sepia tone of nostalgia sometimes doesn't make it seem so overwhelming. So thank you for sharing it so deeply, because when you go through a difficult time, it seems that everything is on top of your head and your shoulders and you don't know what to do. So
Mhm.
since you mentioned struggle in your marriage and you moved out for a year and a half, how is it that you got back to being together? If you could tell us a little bit more about it.
It was a lot of work, Pragati. It was a lot of work. So and I can say there was a time when neither of us was prepared to put in that work either. Or I should give kudos to my husband that he never gave up, right? Because there was a time when I was not prepared to put in that work anymore. But a lot of it is through therapy, working with each other. Um, and I mean, here's a plug for like not avoiding therapy or counseling or whatever name you want to give it. I think a neutral person who can come in and deal with that entity that's the relationship, right? So for us, that counseling was not about me, was not about him. but that entity called the relationship. So our therapist really just helped us regrow that child, like it was dead at that point, right? Or dead or poisonous. And all of that work with our therapist really helped us there. And I have to say, like, therapy is not like a magic pill either, right? You have to find the right person. I
Mhm.
think the first person that we tried actually did make things much worse for us, right? It sent us downhill. And that's when we ended up actually separating, because we actually started doing it before we came to that point of separation. But that's when, like, I gave up, but my husband found this other person who really clicked with both of us, and she did individual sessions for each of us, and she did um, sessions with us together, and she just let us like take it all out, right? Every bitter memory, every gripe, everything that we were angry about each other. It's also a very humbling experience, I have to say, because when I went into those sessions, I was prepared to sort of complain about my husband, but I also ended up having to hear a lot of stuff that I wasn't doing right, right? And you have to be prepared for that too. This isn't the normal, like I've done individual therapy too. That's completely different. I'm right now just focused on marriage therapy. So it was a very, very humbling experience, because there was a lot I learned about myself, that I'm not a perfect person, which I sort of naturally believed, which I don't know. I guess, I don't know if I'm unique in that. I don't think so. I think many of us just think we're doing all the right things, but obviously we're not, right? It takes two to tango. And that's very much true in a relationship that's ruined as well, right? There's problems on both sides. But I think the great thing for me that came out of this is that I'm amazed how repairable relationships are. And anybody who's listening to this, I would love to give them this message that, you know, if there is a relationship that you care about that's not working well, it is repairable. You just need to find the right help, and it can be fixed. I'm telling you 100%. There was a point when I did not at all believe that my husband and I could even talk to each other um, civilly, you know. So, but here we are. We've lived together for um 6 more years since then. So yeah,
I
yeah.
think, this is something which is very important. A lot of
Mhm.
people don't seek help in therapy because they don't know where therapy will take them. And they feel
Yeah,
that, perhaps one person will get the leeway. So thank you for removing that myth, because with the
yeah,
right person, you first get to know yourself. And when you are willing to change yourself, as you shared, that's when things start going uphill. And very rightly, like all the symptoms that you mentioned, that it's not just that a relationship is about the other person, but you yourself, your own body starts protesting. Life situations in any case happen that we don't have any control over. So
mhm.
what is it that you feel, you realize, since we are talking about therapy, and the whole point of this talk is to inspire others to deal with issues, develop their own emotional ability resources, and talk about it. Is there any particular struggle that you had specifically that you think you could talk about with everybody?
Sure, there is so much, Pragati, and it's like it's a long journey, right? For me, I don't think it's an overnight change. I feel like it's just like exercise. You have to put in that time to build your sort of emotional muscle, self-awareness muscle, all of those things, right? So there are so many lessons I've learned that I still carry with me day to day, right? First and foremost, I would say is just being authentic, right? So one thing I didn't mention, through those like 15 or so years that I struggled with so much, especially those early parts in the early 20s, when I was taking care of myself financially as well as my parents and stuff, I was pretending that everything was 100% normal, right? Outwardly, I still wanted to appear as that carefree early 20s adult or mid 20s adult. And I wore a mask in front of everybody. My friends thought, I mean, my friends didn't know how I was struggling with my family issues. My family didn't know how I was struggling to handle all that as still a fairly young adult, right? And especially through the breakup, I think like nobody understood what I was going through. So I have learned to be more authentic, right? We all still wear a mask, most of the times, but it's very, very light. And I also realize that as I share my struggles with others, it really helps them. So that's another reason that I'm more authentic. Some of the other things that, I mean, it's very individual, right? What your issues are, like what makes you stressed out, or what helps you feel relieved. It's very individual. But I'll mention some of the things that I discovered about myself, because maybe it'll click for somebody, right? I mean, for me, one thing is setting boundaries is really important, right? I learned that I'm not good with that. Once I allow a person past a certain boundary, I tend to give endlessly to them, right? And that's not healthy. So setting personal boundaries around where it starts to really um, sort of suck life out of me when I'm giving that much, right? Setting that boundary is super important for me. And then being more aware of which relationships or even activities are drawing energy from me and which ones are refilling me, right? Because there are things that will nourish your spirit, and there are things you have to do that you even have to pretend to enjoy sometimes, or you do enjoy, but it's also sort of draining you, right? So I'm more aware of that now, and I try to balance that out, right? Also, when what's working for me, because sometimes I really want to see my friends and it really helps me recharge. But at other times, I really need to retreat into my own world and get into a quiet space and nourish myself that way. So being more self-aware about that. I said I exercise regularly. I continue to do that. I've also realized how much it helps me. But I have to mention this for just because I think I see such a mental shift in myself. In my 20s and 30s, I exercised, but it was all about like losing weight, looking good, all of that kind of stuff. And it was sort of, I have to put my body through this torture so that I look good. And, I'm thin and whatever. We all go through that. But at some point, this shift happened where exercise for me became not about being like looking like I'm still a teenager or in my early 20s, but it became about like me time and doing something good for myself. So it became an act of love rather than an act of punishment to look good, right? So exercise really shifted for me in terms of that as becoming a stress reliever and a nourisher rather than a drain, right? Um, I try to get enough sleep that, I live in such a fast paced world with like all the responsibilities. And at some point, I just realized the connection between sleep and everything else. So I'm more conscious of that. And then another thing I really want to mention is self compassion. That's something I really learned. And I know a lot of people who are going to watch this are going to be from the same culture where I grew up. In a Jain household, Pragati, like even more than the rest of our Eastern culture, it's a lot about self-sacrifice, right? You need to be able to control your desires. You fast, and if you decide you're not going to eat something, you absolutely cannot eat it, right? Like there's a lot of this toughness upon ourselves that we learn from the culture that we grew up in, right? But we don't learn the other aspect, which I think is also part of our culture, or at least I missed it. I can say that, right? Which is you have to be kind to yourself, right? Um, the first person you have to be kind to is yourself before you worry about non-violence towards animals or others or whoever. You have to be non-violent towards yourself in terms of maybe I'm using nonviolent in the wrong way, but you have to be compassionate towards yourself, right? And we grow up being so tough on ourselves, and that's something I really learned through therapy. That's one of the things my therapist helped me recognize, that I was way, way, way tough on myself, and part of it might have been this cultural upbringing, which I think now, I mean, she didn't mention it, but I'm saying that now. So I've really learned to be compassionate towards myself to the degree that I cannot go on any diets anymore. I'm like, to hell with this. I am eating what I want, which maybe is not healthy, but I don't eat that unhealthy. But it's just about that kindness towards ourselves. Like, if a day didn't go well, it's okay. If I'm down with a headache and I can't play with my kids right now, it's okay. I need to take care of myself too, right? So doing all the right things for oneself. And I think that's pretty much it. I mean, meditation is a part of my sort of self-care routine as well, but to be honest, I'm not very good at it. So I find other ways for like downtime. I mean, when I'm good at it, I'm really good at it, but I'm very lazy about it. Kind of like the attitude most people have towards exercise. I, for some reason, have that attitude towards meditation. So I find slow times for myself, like, I paint, or I, do easy like jigsaw puzzles or whatever, like something that's just, it's non brain work. And it, color is apparently very healing. So there's a lot of color that I'm working with, and it's quiet, and it's I have the time to sit with my thoughts, but not necessarily free, right? So I have a hard time just stopping doing stuff. So it helps me kind of be doing something while taking a very slow time. So those are the things that I do for myself. And I also, honestly, giving back is another part of it for me, because I have been through so many struggles, and um and now I've done it all publicly too, right? Like, there's no mask, it's all out there. So I try to help others in similar situations, and fortunately people come to me because they have seen me go through a lot of stuff. So
I think what
yeah, that's a lot of things.
no, and I like that, you speak about your experiences with the mindset of how it will help another heal. A lot of times
Mhm.
when people wear masks, it's because, they want to show that everything is hunky dory and, they have it all. But when
Mhm.
we are ready to share our sorrows, sometimes we also give courage to another, which I think is the utmost act of charity. And
Yeah.
yes, and like you spoke about things, like we hear about meditation, but yeah, there are people, and I'm glad you brought it up, who don't feel like meditating. What do you do
Yeah.
then? And it's fine, like, so we can't read from a script. We have to know what works for us, and we have to know which emotional ability resources work for us. And
Yes.
before we sign off, I want you to tell me, if you had to describe Priyanka in exactly one word, what would you use and why?
That's a really tough one. Let me see. A seasoned sailor.
Like that. Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear you open your heart out and not think of censoring information, but really talking with the intent that, your struggles will be a pillar of strength to another who hears you. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Pragati. I want to say one last thing. The seasoned sailor and how you wrapped up. I just want to remind everybody, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor, right? So um, any failures or difficult times that you go through, don't be afraid of them. They're just honing your skills that will one day come in handy to help yourself and to help others, right? So yeah, that's it.
You
Thank
take care.
you.